The last letter asterisk, the morning fog rolled in from San Francisco Bay like a gray blanket, wrapping itself around the old police station on Bryant Street. Detective Sarah Chen sat at her desk, a steaming cup of coffee growing cold between her weathered hands. The manila folder before her bore a label that had yellowed with age. Zodiac, case number 105907. Asterisk, 54 years had passed since the first attack. 54 years of theories, suspects, and dead ends. Sarah had inherited the case 3 years ago when Detective Martinez retired. He'd placed the heavy box of files on her desk with a weary smile and said simply, "Maybe fresh eyes will see." What we missed, asterisk, the station hummed with its usual morning activity. Phones rang in the distance. Officers shuffled past her desk, carrying their own burdens of unsolved mysteries. But Sarah's world had narrowed to the contents of this folder, to the careful handwriting of a killer who had taunted an entire city. Asterisk, she opened the folder slowly. As she did, every Tuesday morning, it had become a ritual, a quiet communion with the past. Inside were photographs, witness statements, and copies of the letters that had made the Zodiac infamous. The cipher symbols seemed to dance on the yellowed pages. Mocking decades of cryptographers and amateur sleuths, asterisk, Sarah picked up the first letter. Postmarked July 31, 1969. The block letters were precise, deliberate. "Dear Editor," it began. "This is the Zodiac speaking." Even now, those words sent a chill down her spine. She had read them hundreds of times, but they never lost their power to unsettle. Asterisk, the detective leaned back in her chair, studying the ceiling tiles stained with decades of coffee spills and cigarette smoke. Her predecessor had told her that the key to cold cases wasn't always finding new evidence. Sometimes it was looking at old evidence with new understanding. Asterisk, still chasing ghosts, Chen. Asterisk, Sarah looked up to see Detective James Morrison approaching. With his own cup of coffee, James was old school, a few years from retirement himself. He'd worked alongside Martinez on the Zodiac case for over a decade. Asterisk, every Tuesday. Sarah replied, not looking away from the letter in her hands. Martinez said the pattern might matter. The timing of the letters, the locations of the attacks. Asterisk, James settled into the chair beside her desk. His face was lined with the kind of weariness that came from too many unsolved cases, too many families. Without answers, we mapped it all out years ago. Plotted every location, every date. Ran it through computers, consulted with FBI profilers, nothing clicked. Asterisk, Sarah nodded, but something nagged at her. She spread out the crime scene photos across her desk. Benicia, Vallejo, Napa County, San Francisco. The locations formed no obvious pattern on the map. The dates seemed random. December 20th, 1968. July 4th, 1969. September 27th, 1969. October 11th, 1969. Asterisk, James, she said slowly, what if we've been looking at this wrong? What if the pattern isn't geographical or chronological? Asterisk, what do you mean? Asterisk, Sarah reached for a different file, one containing personal details about the victims. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, the young couple at Lake Herman Road, Darlene. Ferrin and Mike Mago, at Blue Rock Springs. Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell, at Lake Berryessa. Paul Stein, the cab driver, in San Francisco. Asterisk. Look at the victims again. Not where they were killed, but who they were. Asterisk, James leaned forward. His interest piqued, despite himself. We profiled the victims years ago. No obvious connections. Asterisk, no obvious connections between the people, Sarah agreed. But what about their stories, their lives interrupted? Asterisk, she pulled out her notebook, one she'd been keeping for months. Pages of careful observations, connections that might mean nothing, or everything. David and Betty Lou were just 17 and 16. High school sweethearts planning their future together. Darlene was a young mother, working to support her daughter. Cecilia was a college student, passionate about music and poetry. Paul was saving money to support his family. Asterisk, Sarah, We know all this. Asterisk, but do we understand it? She stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the busy street below. People hurried past, wrapped in the morning fog, each carrying their own dreams and fears. What if the Zodiac wasn't choosing victims randomly? What if he was choosing hope? Asterisk, the words hung in the air between them. James was quiet for a long moment, considering. Asterisk, hope. Asterisk, Sarah turned back to face him. Every victim was at a moment of possibility. Young love, new motherhood, education, providing for family. The Zodiac claimed he was collecting slaves for the afterlife. But what if he was really collecting something else? What if he was taking the moments when people believed in their futures? Asterisk, James stood up slowly, his coffee forgotten. That's a hell of a theory, Chen, but how does it help us find him? Asterisk, Sarah returned to her desk and pulled out the last confirmed letter. Dated 1974. In it, the Zodiac claimed 37 victims, far more than the 5 confirmed cases. She had always wondered about that number. Asterisk, what if he stopped? She said, quietly. What if something changed in 1974 that made him stop killing? Asterisk, people thought he might have died, moved away, been incarcerated for other crimes. Asterisk, or, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, what if he found what he was looking for? What if he found hope for himself? Asterisk, the station seemed quieter now. Even the phones had stopped ringing. James sat back down, studying Sarah's face, with the kind of attention he reserved for witness testimony. Asterisk, you think he's still alive? Asterisk, I think he's been alive all this time, living with what he did. Maybe even. Sarah paused, the thought almost too fragile to speak aloud, maybe even regretting it. Asterisk, she opened the evidence box and pulled out a smaller folder, one containing letters that had been dismissed over the years as hoaxes. Letters that claimed to be from the Zodiac but lacked the authentication codes, the precise details that marked the genuine correspondence. Asterisk, James, what if some of these weren't hoaxes? What if they were genuine but different? What if he was trying to say something else? Asterisk, among the dismissed letters was one dated 1987. The handwriting was different, less precise. The tone was different too. Instead of threats and taunts, it contained something that might have been remorse. It had been filed away as the work of a copycat. Someone seeking attention by claiming to be the infamous killer. Asterisk, Sarah had read it dozens of times over the past months. I want you to know, it said, that what I did was wrong. I took away their tomorrows. I carry their faces with me, every day. Asterisk, Chen, James said carefully. Even if that letter is genuine, even if he's alive and sorry, what do we do with that? The families still don't have justice. Asterisk, Sarah looked at the photographs of the victims again. Young faces frozen in time, dreams interrupted. But she also thought about families who had spent decades wondering, questioning, living with an absence that could never be filled. Asterisk, maybe justice isn't just about punishment, she said. Maybe sometimes it's about truth. About finally understanding why. Asterisk, the fog outside was beginning to lift, revealing patches of blue sky. The city was waking up, people starting their days with the assumption that they would see evening, that tomorrow would come as promised. Asterisk, Sarah closed the folder gently. She wouldn't solve the Zodiac case this Tuesday, just as she hadn't solved it the previous Tuesday or the one before. But something had shifted in her understanding. The pattern she'd been searching for wasn't in the locations or the dates. It was in the human need for meaning, for connection, for the belief that life could be better than it was. Asterisk, you know what, James? She said, standing up and putting on her jacket. I think I'm going to visit some of the families today. The ones who are still alive. Not to give them false hope, but to listen. To remember that this case isn't just about catching a killer, it's about honoring the people who were taken. Asterisk, James nodded slowly. Want some company? Asterisk, I'd like that. Asterisk, as they left the station together, Sarah carried the weight of the unsolved case with her, but it felt different now, less like a burden and more like a responsibility. Somewhere in the city, or perhaps far away, a man lived with the memory of what he had done. Whether he would ever be found, whether justice would ever be served in the traditional sense, remained unknown. But the victims would not be forgotten. Their hopes, cut short, but not erased, would continue to matter. And perhaps, Sarah thought as she walked into the clearing morning, that was its own kind of victory against the darkness. The Zodiac had claimed he was collecting slaves for the afterlife. Instead, he had created something else entirely, a community of people determined to remember, to care, to ensure that love and hope would always be stronger than fear and violence. The case file would return to Sarah's desk next Tuesday, as it had for years and as it might for years to come. But she would approach it differently now, not just as a puzzle to be solved, but as a story of human resilience that deserved to be told with patience, compassion, and unwavering dedication to the truth.